All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the State of the Borough live address, as well as an update on our recommended budget for the next year. I'd like to point everyone to the website, fnsb.gov, for more information on any of our operations. We also have a special page set up, fnsb.gov/budget, for anything pertaining to our budget discussions today. To start off with, I'd like to go over our timeline for our budget process. Today we're having our State of the Borough address, and where we talk about the highlights of the borough budget. We'll have a full release of the budget in the upcoming days between now and Thursday of this week. It will be shared live on our webpage, fnsb.com, fnsb.gov/budget. We'll have a link there. You can click on that tab as soon as it goes live. We're anticipating it to be sometime on Thursday. It could be a little bit sooner, but that's your resource for all things budget this year. Looking at our timeline for the next month, April is our budget month here at the Fairbanks North Star Borough, where we have most of our discussions, work through most of our committees to come up with the eventual budget, which will be approved, assembly approval pending in May. The timeline that we have, April 7th, this week on Thursday, is going to be the Finance Committee work session. We'll have staff giving a full breakdown and report on our budget for this, our recommended budget for this upcoming year. April 14th is when we start our weekend sessions, our Saturday work sessions with the Borough Finance Committee. At this point, we're going to be sharing through we'll go through line by line, every department, every division's budget, to share that with the Assembly, and then take questions. And then the committee will also begin their work starting on the 16th to work through that particular budget with the recommendations due to the Assembly as a whole by the end of April, early May. We have several sessions for folks to be able to provide comment on the budget once it goes live. The first one is going to be that April 14th Borough Assembly meeting. For any items not on the agenda, folks will be able to testify between 6 and 7 o'clock at that time. And then we have a specific date set aside, May 5th, for our budget public hearing. So if you're interested in providing testimony on any item on the budget this year, May 5th is going to be your Assembly meeting to keep note of. We also do have May 11th scheduled for any citizens' comments not on the agenda, which would be the budget at that time. And then eventually we have our June 9th Assembly meeting for action on the mill rate. So this is where we get our final values in for the upcoming year, and then the actual mill rate is set on that June 9th meeting. All right, working through our agenda today, we're going to go through first accomplishments from the last year. We're going to talk about the FY23 proposed budget highlights, and then look to the future. What does the future hold for the borough? To start off with our achievements for this last year, the first thing we'd like to talk about is our capital improvement program. We're in the third year of that program, so it's a big success. We went through our second revision over the last really 10 months or so. And we've had a number of new projects brought into that CIP, and a number of projects that have been cleaned out as they've been completed. In this last year, we initiated 29 projects at a value of $31 million over the last 2 years. We project to initiate 33 projects valued at $39 million in this upcoming year. All of these projects are fiscally constrained to the budgets and the funding that we have available. And we are budgeting an estimated $12 million to our CIP-MR, which is the funding source we use for all of these projects. The CIP-MR fund balance projected over the next 10 years is going to hold steady at that $10 million, so it gives us reserves should we have any unforeseen circumstances that come up. I'm going to go through a list of the projects, the ones that we've substantially completed over the last 2-year cycle, and then I'll talk about the future projects, the ones that we're anticipating to start with this next capital budget. A few examples of the substantially completed projects or fully completed projects. We have Barnett Phase 4, North Pole Middle School mechanical replacement, Carlson Center mechanical replacement, Borough Administration generator replacement, Alder School demo, School District maintenance building water, Eielson High School roof replacement, Lathrop High School gym and locker room roof replacement, Mary Cy Rec Center improvements, C&D cell debris area at the landfill, Salcha transfer site, bus stop shelters phase 4, Wood River roof replacement, Pioneer Park train truss repair, Carlson Center roof replacement, Centennial Center vestibule temporary repairs. And then projects we're going to be starting in this upcoming year is the Maryside Tennis Courts, CAC, Mechanical Controls, it's Carlson Center, Transit Administration and Maintenance Facility. This is our new transit facility going to be started over off of Lathrop. Pioneer Park Water Supply and DEC Compliance Project, Nolween Library Skylight Replacement, Ballfield Dugout Replacement, Phase 1, Park Abandoned Restroom Demo Phase 1, Westcott Pool Maintenance and Animal Shelter Replacement Design, Gold Panner Stadium Upgrades, SS Nenana Phase 1, John Weaver Memorial Skate Park, Westcott Pool Slide Replacement, Assembly Chambers Audio-Visual Replacement, Mary Sy Hot Tub, Nolween Library Upgrades Design, Tanana Middle School Exterior, and Two Rivers Elementary Interior Renovation. Looking to other achievements in the FY 21-22 year, we had 2 housing initiatives. The first one was the Energy Efficiency Tax Incentive. This was initially approved by the Assembly last year. We've had 10 approved applications from the last build cycle with $44,926 paid in tax incentives or tax credits. The current application period is live right now for construction that happened last year. We anticipate that many, if not more, applications for 6-star energy projects that happened over the last season. On the other housing tax incentive program that we did was approved by the Assembly in February of 2022. It was designed to accommodate building and new construction in the city of North Pole and the city of Fairbanks. The application period ends December 31st, 2023, and I'm happy to say we've had 3 applications submitted for a total of 24 units already on that application. Those will be going through their internal review right now, and those will be heard by the Assembly in the upcoming month. Other achievements, the American Rescue Plan. We received $18.8 million through the federal COVID-19 recovery funds in July of last year. The Assembly adopted programs in September of 21, and funds have been allocated funds are to be allocated between now and December 2024 to be fully spent by 2026. Projects that are approved and underway, we have the healthcare premium pay for essential workers. That's where we provided $4 million of grant funding to the hospital to help pay for their worker shortages. We also provided 2 fiscal year grants to Explore Fairbanks for tourism impact and advertising. We have purchased a new snow groomer for Birch Hill in partnership with the Nordic Ski Club. We are also approved in rolling out our healthcare and health and social services pass-through grants, which was recently adopted by the Assembly, and our oil to gas conversion program, where we provided $1 million to those oil to gas conversion in the oil to gas conversion program. Other achievements, we applied for a Build Back Better grant application in partnership with the Mat-Su Borough, the Alaska Railroad, and the IGU last year. That total grant request was $203 million. We were not successful in that application, but we are looking at other infrastructure programs that are coming out and have really forged a strong relationship with the Mat-Su Borough. That total project included $75.9 million for the IGU for Titan II expansion, $96.1 million for the Point McKenzie rail extension to the Titan facility, as well as $31.9 million for Spurs and Fairbanks, North Pole, and the Mat-Su Borough. As I mentioned, we're hopefully going to be applying for more funding, more requests for funding for that particular project in the future. We also received a baler, vertical baler from the horizontal baler, not vertical, from the Fort Wainwright U.S. Army Base. This is anticipated to be a great addition to our recycling program. However, we are still in need of facility improvements and upgrades to be able to make that particular piece of equipment work for us. But that's a great several $100,000 worth of equipment that was donated to the Fairbanks North Star Borough. The first year of the North Pole High School ice rink was completed. That particular project was one that was taken on by volunteers and done by volunteers. We had our first full year, and with the cold weather we've had lately, you're probably still able to go and skate out there. But that's out at the high school, and it's a covered facility, one that hadn't been utilized in almost 20 years until we were able to turn that back on. Our Natural Resource Division sold all our over-the-counter land that was available this last year. Land was particularly a hot item. And we're happy to say that we've completely cleared the deck, although we've got lots of work now to get more land available from the borough's land reserves to make available to the public. We did complete our 30th Avenue development and have 6 new lots that are available to the public. They are under contract at this point. We do hope that we can finalize that sale sometime over the summer. And we also sold the old North Pole Library last year, so that's been transitioned over into private hands, and I think is in operation at this time. We've also kicked off our Fairbanks Talks Trash campaign last year. This is an education and outreach program targeted at our transfer sites. This particular program is one to educate the public on the proper uses and improper uses of those facilities to help avoid unneeded costs to the tax district and improve just overall service at those facilities. As a part of that, this last year we also did receive a $10 million targeted airshed grant. This is going to go to our wood stove exchange program, as well as other air quality related projects here in the Fairbanks North Star Borough. And the interior gas utility turned on its North Pole site in February of 2021 and started taking customers shortly after. Other achievements this last year, we had several big policy level ordinances that were passed. One is we changed the lapse rules for the Fairbanks North Star Borough year-end lapse. We changed the system to where it first funded the CIPMR. If that was fully funded, then it would roll to our general fund balance. So we would be able to use that for tax relief, tax abatement for future years. We also established a code enforcement volunteer cleanup program and put $100,000 into that program late last year. This is for properties that are currently not in code compliance due to things like excessive rubbish and junk. Community neighbors and volunteer groups can come together and get the tipping fees waived for any community projects to help with cleaning up of those code enforcement, those code complaint properties. So we're happy to announce that and let folks know that those applications are out and we have funding available for this upcoming summer. We also changed our child care facility zoning requirements to align them with state statutes. And we created a solid waste collection district code enforcement program. And so this was a new thing that we did this last year that really was targeted at those transfer sites and making sure that we had proper use of those facilities, again, to help reduce cost and then improve overall service at those particular facilities. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about some of the challenges we had this last year. I'll stay with the end of last year. Early this year, we had the winter storms, the snowpocalypse, ice apocalypse, what many folks have referred to. We're still dealing with many of those challenges right now. If you're traversing any of our parking lots in the community, I would ask you to be extremely careful, as well as our side roads. Many of them are still covered in ice. Our operations were shut down for 5 days. I would say that that's not a normal thing. It is not normal with the exception of the pandemic. But that was a significant impact to all of our operations this last year, as well as I mentioned, we are still seeing those impacts to the community. We are still on the tail end of the pandemic. We did stand down our multi-agency coordination group, the Interior Unified Command, in partnership with local agencies. And we continued to operate over the last year with impacts to COVID to our operations. And we continue to see those impacts in areas such as employment and workforce shortages. On the EPA air quality side, we did discover this last year in partnership with the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation, essentially a flawed wood stove test program with the EPA. This particular issue has certainly elevated conversations with our interior delegation as well as EPA down in DC, as these test results are challenging for us with our air quality situation. So this continues to be a challenge as we look at our wood stove exchange program. We want to make sure we're getting the cleanest stoves out into the community. We also did have 2 roof failures in the end of 21 and early 22. The first one was the Esther Volunteer Fire Department. I'm happy to say that project has reached substantial completion and is back up and operational. And we did have a partial failure of the roof system at Hunter Elementary last year. Nothing that I'm aware of this year, as we've had a number of challenges with the snow and the ice, but we did have those roof failures in the last fiscal year. We also had, we talked about the good things we're doing with our transfer sites. Last year we had an exceptional amount of waste that was brought in through the transfer sites. We had to increase our budget by several $100,000, I think close to $500,000 for additional waste that was generated at the transfer sites. One of the things I think folks are unaware of is that all of the waste that's dropped at the transfer sites is paid for by that solid waste collection district. That's paid for by a mill rate in your budget. And so when we have numbers that exceed the expected waste tippage, tonnage fees that we see at the transfer sites, we have to pay for that. The solid waste collection district does. So that was definitely a challenge we saw this last year. Best we can assume is that with COVID and everyone being home, is they decided to clean out their attics and generated a bit more waste than we expected to see. The numbers do look promising this next year, for this year that we're in and the upcoming year, that we're back on target to what our expected numbers are, but that's definitely something we're watching closely. And I mentioned workforce shortages. We continue to see those challenges with our operations, particularly our lifeguards and bus drivers are two of the areas that we have challenge in. I'm going to transition now to our budget discussion and go over the administration goals for this upcoming year's budget. The goals that I've established for our upcoming budget is to maintain stability in our services, to create efficiencies within our organization through automation and systems improvement, to maintain or lower the mill rate, encourage development of new construction within the Fairbanks North Star Borough, remove barriers to development, and then streamline our government processes. For the FY 21-22 revised operating budget, as of the 1st of April, the amount that we had was $175,078,720. The FY 22-23 recommended budget is $180,401,554. That's a $5,322,000 increase from the FY 22 revised budget, and that reflects a 3% increase over FY 22 revised. I will say, when we look at our numbers, the inflationary numbers we have for this last year were substantially higher than that, and so we were able to keep our numbers under that amount. A majority of those increases are for our COLAs and step increases, which were 3% this last year. When we look at historical property tax rates, we have had a number of years where we've had higher mill rates than some of our averages in the past. I'm happy to say, with the increase in values that we've had over the last year, and then an eye towards management of our revenues, we were actually able to bring down the mill rate. We're proposing to bring down the mill rate by 1.2 mils in this upcoming and this recommended budget. Many of our other collection district and non-area-wide funds are also down from where they were last year. Most of that is attributable to the higher values and new construction we've seen over the last year. I mentioned operating revenues. We have a bit of an interesting phenomenon where our operating revenues are actually down or flat compared to prior years. A lot of this is due to the work that we've been doing to watch our budgets, to look at new construction, how that's impacting the overall total taxable value, and then establishing what our total mill rate is, the revenue that's needed to generate to operate our borough facilities. Quick breakdown of expenses by departments. Our number one budget item for the upcoming fiscal year is education. That comes in just under $50 million at $49 million. Public Works is our next largest expenditure, as well, followed then by debt service, contribution to CIPMR, and then Parks and Rec. And we get into our operational departments after that, which come in anywhere between $10 to $12 million down to our smallest departments. Looking at the recommended budget for the upcoming year, our net taxable value at this point, subject to BOE appeals and hearings, is up $643 million, or up 7.25% from FY 21. And as I mentioned earlier, our area-wide mill rate, as presented to the Assembly, will decrease by 1.25 mils. Our FY 21 budgetary fund, our FY 21 general fund budgetary lapse was $2.4 million, and then our current unassigned fund balance is $34.8 million, $10.5 million over the target reserve amount. And the difference, what you see there, is between the budgeted numbers that we have for the last fiscal year and then what the actual numbers are, when you talk about the difference between budgetary and actuals. The budget plans to use $6.74 million from fund balances. This is across all of our funds. Of that, $2 million is general fund. The other ones are things like our transit or solid waste enterprise fund, where we're doing larger projects, or we historically have lapses that we use for operations in those facilities. So the key number there is that $2 million from the general fund, which is what we're proposing to use in the upcoming budget for tax relief. And it's the amount that we're using from the fund balance. The budget is $12.1 million under the voter-approved tax cap on an area-wide basis. Many of our other service areas are either at or very close to those tax caps. The budget does assume no support from the state for our school debt bond reimbursement. That amount is $7,865,000. It does provide flat funding for the school district at $49,045,400. And then our local required contribution for education funding is just under $34 million at $33,913,000. When we look at FTE impacts in the budget, we propose 3 new positions and a reduction of 1. We had 1 FTE in the for a GIS analyst position for natural resource development to help us get borough-owned land into private hands, as well as add a customer service specialist to the transportation department to help with providing those services to our residents. We add 1 FTE for the code enforcement officer for community planning. This was recently approved in the current budget, and then a change made in the recommended budget. We also then remove 1 FTE from facilities maintenance technician from Public Works. Moving on, some other changes that we have in the upcoming budget. We are proposing an increase to the Parks and Recreation temporary summer hire by 25% to address the 50% vacancy rate we've seen over the last summer. This is for many of our young or college-age students that choose to work for the Fairbanks North Star Borough that help with our summer facilities and ground maintenance. Excuse me for anyone on the mic there. We are proposing to decrease the delinquency rate for unpaid property taxes to 2.5%. This is a good thing, as we don't anticipate to see as many foreclosures in the upcoming year. And then we also include a substantial allocation for contingency based on the uncertainty with the Fort Knox valuation dispute. So that's something we've done in the last 2 years. We're proposing to carry that forward until we hear from the courts what that ruling will be. The American Recovery Plan Act funds and associated projects are not included in those budgetary numbers as they were authorized under a previous ordinance. And we have increased our support in local grants from $700,000 to $2.1 million in the upcoming budget. A lot of that reflects things like increase in bed tax numbers, bed tax dollar numbers, and programs that flow through to those agencies. All right, as we look to the future, Carlson Center began operations under borough management this last year. We've had some really good success, a number of good programs. For anyone that was out, I think last weekend was the home show. And so we're getting back into those things that we did pre-COVID, as well as with the management of that facility by a private contractor. So lots of good things happening at the Carlson Center. We do have many other programs available at that facility over the next, that have started this last year that will continue into the next year. We also have some exciting partnerships that we're working on with different sports agencies in town to provide additional resources in the Carlson Center. And the plan is that we want the parking lot being at least somewhat full, if not completely full, as many days of the year as we possibly can. We want to use that facility. The North Star Athletics Complex has started its scoping phase. This is a large multi-phase, multi-year project that we are just on the very early phases of starting. We do have community surveys, and folks are working with our agencies, our community groups and agencies on that particular project. As I did mention, this is slated to be a replacement of our 2 pool facilities in Fairbanks, that's Mary Cy and Hammy Pool, as well as to be able to expand the operations that we have for indoor sports under a central facility. We do mention, as I did mention, we do see this to be a multi-phase project, and it is currently not funded in any of the next 10 years as part of our capital improvement program. So we are certainly on the early throes of this, and that scoping phase is a really important one to make sure that we've appropriately sized this project for the community and that it takes into consideration all of the things that we hope it to be. As I mentioned with the capital improvement program earlier in the presentation, we are starting the transit maintenance facility this summer. The groundbreaking will be happening. The contract is out. I think we have bid closure or not? Not yet. Okay, so it's still on the street, but we are anticipating that the ground will be broken this summer and the project will start. We do anticipate 2 years for construction of this particular facility, as it is a pretty large facility and it's slated to replace everything that we have over at Pegger Road for the current transit facility. We have a number of planning documents out there right now. Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy continues to be ongoing. Our FNSB Trails Plan continues to be in process, as well as our roads plan. So these are many of these documents haven't been touched in decades, and so this is an important process for us to go through to make sure that we are appropriately planning for the future when it comes to our road networks, when it comes to our recreational trails, and when it comes to our economic well-being for here in the community. So we encourage folks to go to our website, fnsb.gov, look for Trails Plan, Roads Plan, or the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy. And wrapping up, we have a number of exciting things happening in the borough. We're on the very tail end of the F-35 rollout. The 49th aircraft arrived here just a short month ago, and we actually just got in my inbox, if you will, the final aircraft arrival, I think, which they're scheduling for May of this year. So between now and the end of the end of the year, we have anticipate the remaining 200 folks as a part of that build out to be arriving in the community, so they'll be here all by the end of the summer. As we look to the future, the next big exciting thing is the KC-135. There's an active association that will be coming to Eielson Air Force Base with 4 additional Stratotankers. This is going to be an addition of about 250 personnel plus their families, beginning in FY23 over the next several years, anticipated to be completed in FY25. We do anticipate that there is going to continue to be a strong demand for housing as a part of this build out over the next 3 years, and we need additional housing to be built in the community on top of what we already have been doing in order to meet that demand. And the housing incentives that we talked about earlier are a part of our way to try to address those concerns. And that's what I have for our State of the Borough, an update and highlights on the recommended budget. We do have some folks here in the audience with us. I'd be happy to take questions, dive into any areas of concern or question with the presentation. If anyone is interested in the budget, I'll point us back to our fnsb.gov website/budget, and that budget button will go live as soon as that digital copy is available. But at the very latest, it will be available on Thursday with the presentation to the Assembly. Amanda.
Good question. You mentioned that the budget for the upcoming year would go up by about $5 million. Where will that money come from? Have you had much new construction? Can you get into the details about that? Because as you know, the assessments went up and it looks like you're pushing down the taxes a little bit, and it makes me wonder, well, if you have enough new construction to take care of that $5 million, I'm sitting here thinking, well, maybe my taxes will be steady.
Yeah, so it depends on what you saw for increases over the last year. For most folks that were under that 10% amount, it's conceivable that the number could actually be the same, if not lower, than what you paid last year. We did see a pretty decent number for new construction this last season in residential. And so that new additional value is going to certainly be helping to cover that difference. But we did have other areas that were historically undervalued. That essentially is where that total amount comes from.
I was going to follow up with that with your figure about the net taxable was up 7.25%. Is that new property in the borough, or is that assessments or a combination?
It's a combination. So it includes any new value that was added to the book. So if you built a new house, a new shop, a new garage, anything like that would be a part of that, but it also accounts for all increases. So if you had a home last year that was worth $100,000 and this year is worth $150,000, that value is also attributable to that total taxable increase.
I don't suppose you know off the top of your head how many new buildings there are.
So when we looked at the analysis from last year, it was a little over 300 units. Some of those are multifamily units. We typically see about 300 a year being built in the borough, at least over the last 4 to 5 years.
Are you talking about housing, not commercial properties?
Correct. I don't have a number for commercial,
I have.
but that commercial number is a part of the total, that 600 and some million dollars in increase.
Can I switch you over to workforce development and recruitment? And where is the borough having trouble getting folks?
Yeah, generally speaking, it's across the board. We do have some areas that are more acute than others, particularly when they have direct interaction with the public and the services that they provide. Some of those specialty positions, the two that I mentioned earlier are lifeguards, where there's a substantial training period to get someone up to speed, as well as our bus drivers. Many of our bus drivers that we have currently, if you're driving a big bus, if you will, not a Vantran or one of our vans, you have to have a Class B CDL with air brake endorsement. And if folks do have those endorsements, they may be working for other outfits where they can make more money. So we are looking at programs where we can provide training. Maybe if an individual comes to the borough and says, I'd love to be a bus driver, I don't have a CDL, we're working with our collective bargaining agreements and unions to be able to put together programs where we can get folks that training. Same thing with our lifeguards. We bring folks on, we're able to train them in-house.
Alex Bethel, KGBM. Your budget has called for the same funding for the school district that they received last year. Knowing that in their proposed budget they asked for an additional $2 million, what do you see happening in this case, and what would need to happen for that?
Yeah, the school board did ask for an additional $2 million over what the prior year amount was. As we looked at development of the budget, we did leave room in fund balance. We anticipate that there will be a discussion with the assembly about covering that additional $2 million, most likely from the fund balance for the school district.
Can I go again?
Yes.
I think there's some money left over from the CARES grants last year. I don't know how much off the top of my head. I feel like the assembly set aside like 6.75 million or something, and I don't remember if they had any other ordinances come through to spend out of that. But and you had mentioned, I think, in your speech that the budget numbers you're giving, that's kind of set aside. It's not incorporated in the fund balance or anything. Or I think that's what you were saying. But anyway, are you just waiting for the assembly to make a proposal, or have you thought about that funding? And I know there's sideboards around it, but I just wonder, are you guys gonna just hold on to it and see what happens with COVID, or have you come up with any ideas?
Good question. So the Borough Assembly did approve a number of projects for that $18 million that we received. I will say CARES Act funding has been completely extinguished and closed out. That program was, CARES was original COVID money. The ARPA funding is the second tranche that we received from the federal government. And that amount has a number of different programs. The Assembly did, at the last minute, make an amendment and pull out, I want to say $7 million roughly, that was set aside for particular projects. We've had a couple smaller ones that have come through that have allocated some of those amounts. But the majority of it, $6.5 million, I think, still sits in an unallocated pot. We do have, as part of the capital budget, $4 million that we are proposing to use of ARPA funding for the water and sewer upgrades to Pioneer Park. That is subject to approval by the Assembly in the budget process, but that does leave about $2 to $2.5 million that still is yet to be appropriated by the Borough Assembly. We do have a number of projects that were originally considered as part of the public review for ARPA. So those are still out there in play. We're still having discussions about them, but they've not been appropriated at this time.
And then maybe connected, if I could take another question, do you know if the hospital spent that money that you guys had provided them? And I don't remember if it was CARES or ARPA, but it was COVID relief money that you guys provided the hospital during, I think, one of the, maybe the Delta wave or something. I don't know if you have a conversation with them, but do you just give them the money and then that's that, or do you know if they spent it all? Or?
So it's a reimbursement program, and so they're currently going through that process right now. Once we do, I think we're doing it quarterly is what our billing cycle is, and so once they complete their next quarter, they'll be able to submit billing to us. But we're essentially holding that funding until we get the receipts and information we need from the hospital, which that time we would reimburse them for those costs. But the agreements have all been executed, and they're working on that.
And do you know if all that money, if they need all that money?
I don't believe they've done any request yet, but that doesn't mean that they don't have any of those expenses that are occurring. I don't know what their burn rate is going to be for that entire program. We have several years, and so I think it's anticipated that this would stretch out over a period of time.
I can go again.
Okay, yeah, mine is kind of a small.
Mine is labs, and I just want to understand, it's, because you and I emailed about this, or maybe with Lenine, I think it was 10.5 million for from the last audit for the current lapse. It sounds like that's all going to go into that KIP fund balance, or is that, for 2021, I felt like you guys did a memo, and I know you're getting a new CFO, but there was a memo and it kind of outlined, here's the lapse, and this much goes here and this much goes there, and it sort of outlined like the pieces of it that get knocked off and go to different things because under code. And today you had mentioned that you were building up this KIP fund balance. I don't know if that's what you
What
wanted.
used to be called the facilities maintenance reserve?
Correct.
But it sounded like you wanted to have a fund balance, like a reserve there for the buildings, not just to like spend out of to build these buildings. Or correct me if I'm wrong, but I was just wondering, like, if you could go through the lapse a little bit.
Mhm.
So did most of the lapse from the most current audit go toward that building fund, and or are you proposing it in your budget? Like, is that?
A couple different issues. So when we talk about the lapse, there's the roughly $2.5 million in budgetary numbers. So the difference between what we budgeted for in revenue, what we actually brought in revenue. So what that means is, essentially we brought in more than we anticipated. That's on a budgetary sense. When we look at the actual numbers, the kind of more cash basis of where we sit, our general fund balance grew by about $10 million. So that's the cash money when you look at differences between revenues and expenditures. And sometimes that gets a little bit conflated. In the past, we've had the lapse language was based on the budgetary numbers, not the actual numbers. With the lapse ordinance, we kind of ironed all that out and said, no, we're really just interested in what is the actual lapse amount. So what we did is we said, okay, we've simplified this whole process. If there is a lapse, the first thing it will do is fully fund the CIPMR if it was not already authorized in the prior year based on a budgetary basis. So I am happy to say that in the current fiscal year that we're in, the Assembly did fully fund, and my recommended budget included fully funding the CIPMR at 10% of revenue. So when we look at lapse from the last fiscal year, what that means is the funding does not go into the CIPMR because it's already funded. It then falls into what essentially is our general fund. So that's where we saw that growth of $10 million in general fund balance. So what that does for us for the Assembly when it comes to our new budgetary process is as we look to the next year, they have additional funding to say, okay, we're going to provide this for education, maybe tax relief. They can reallocate it to other programs. But we've essentially set up a waterfall amount to where CIP is funded first if there's lapse, then it's general fund.
And the CIP's got fully funded the last time around.
Correct.
So there's, in your budget, you left that alone, the lapse, you didn't need it to balance your budget?
So we did provide $2 million as part of the general fund contribution for tax relief. And so this is something that historically the Assembly's done to help lower the mill rate. That's really that 0.25 mils is essentially what that, a little bit less than 0.2 mils is what that equates to. That because we had the funds in fund balance, we can use to essentially pay for the current year's operations. In the past, it's been much higher than that. I think one of my first years, we had almost $6 or $7 million that we used in fund balance to cover the cost of operations. So we're slowly getting to the point where we essentially don't need to do that.
So are you saying that the lapse from this year is what's paying for this mill rate decrease?
A piece of it. So of the 1.25 mils, $2 million of that, 2 million equivalency, is for tax, is for, what do we call it, tax reduction. It's allocated for tax reduction. Which, if you're looking at the math, we've got a couple ordinances that are working through that are going to chip away at some of that fund balance, but that leaves a pretty healthy balance for the Assembly to be able to have deliberations during our upcoming work sessions on what they choose to do with it, whether it be allocated to CIPMR, school district, other maintenance facility projects, things like that.
So you're leaving it to the Assembly on the rest of it?
There's going to be
Hold it, keep it in the...
correct. Yeah, it's going to be, we're leaving above the minimum required amount target reserve.
But you did take a little bit of it to lower the mill rate.
Correct. That's that 2 million.
Yeah, and that was sort of the train of thinking for you guys on that mill rate decrease. You were able to take a little bit from the lab.
And when we look at historic numbers, that seems like something that, if we have lapses in the future, is that, it's something that we may be able to continue. So it's not so large that it's going to get us way off target when we look at operations, and it's a manageable number.
As a writer, I worry about telling, it seems like if I write that the mill rate is going down, people will expect their tax bill to go down. But with the assessments up, like, it seems like the way to characterize it might be like a draw. You know what I mean? Like a flat.
For some people, it will be a draw.
And some people may see savings. Other folks may still see substantial increases. It really depends on the value of your property and how that reflects the prior year numbers that you were paying. So it is, when we talked about this with some of our earlier discussions on when the assessment values came out, is, this doesn't necessarily mean your numbers are going to go up, your tax bills are going to go up by that amount. It really depends on what the overall taxable value is, and then what the eventual mill rate is. Alex?
And you mentioned you wanted to create efficiencies through automation and systems improvements. Specifically, what are we talking about being automated or improved?
A number of the things that we've been working on over the years are things that we're going to continue to work on when it comes to permitting, when it comes to applying for fees, things like that at the borough. We do have a program that was allocated in the ARPA funds to transition a lot of our stuff online, to be able to take online payment. We do have a new tax system that's coming online this next year, which we're hoping is going to be a much more user-friendly system than we currently have. When we look at other things such as how we operate our meetings, how we are able to do what we do now with live streaming, whether it be our committee meetings or borough assembly meetings, looking at making those systems easier for folks to use, easier to maneuver. We have a project actually in the chambers here, starting I think in the next few months, to digitize. So we're going to take and add screens. We're going to add different processes that'll integrate with our website more to make it more user-friendly for folks.
The plans, the road plan, trails plan, sets plan, comprehensive economic development, are any of those being paid for with defense funds?
Yeah, actually, I think all three of those, or well, two of them. So roads plan and trails plan were paid for through a OLDCC grant, prior OEA. This is part of our relationship with OEA or with OLDCC is in regards to the growth that we were seeing at Eielson. So we look at these plans as really foundational documents for a lot of our planning actions, and so they're working with us to update those. The Borough Assembly did approve funding out of general fund for the SEDS, so that's a self-funded particular planning document, but we've had a lot of really good success with that particular planning effort, and hope to see some good results from it. It's been a great forging of relationships with our key industry leaders here in town.
And then switching subjects, 30th Avenue development. What are the properties there that have been, you said there's still a contract in place?
So we had 2 direct sales, one to the birthing center and then the Montessori school. So essentially their lots now continue all the way to the Mitchell Highway. Those transactions were closed out this last year. And then the prior, I guess the subdivision that was developed created, I believe, 6 lots adjacent to that property that were on the open market. We did have an individual come in and essentially start a contract for those lots, and so we're going through a new appraisal process, and then they'll have the option to purchase.
Can I ask about Nordale School?
Sure.
In the discussions of the school district, the Board of Education's discussions about their budget, they talked about, they raised the issue of instead of having special programs enter into the Nordale School building to the career development program, the bridge, and homeschooling, the best homeschool, occupying the space in Nordale, that there would actually be some savings, although they weren't sure how much, to just mothball Nordale for a year and look at it again in a while. They ended up voting that down. But can you see that coming up in the assembly because people are looking for savings anywhere?
So the Assembly Board of Education relationship is an interesting relationship. It's established through statute and code, where the Borough Assembly establishes, if you will, a funding amount for education, which includes a local required contribution, as well as includes any additional local amount up to the maximum. So for us, it's been around that $50 million mark. We essentially write the check, provide it to the district, and then the Board of Education is the one that determines the operations. The Assembly is really limited in their ability to determine or to dictate, if you will, operations to the school board. That is why we have that elected body. So when it comes to decisions and operations for Nordale, that is really a Board of Education responsibility. And what I've communicated to the district and to the district administration is, as you look at operations, really focus on providing education to our students, doing it to the best of your ability with the resources you have available. And if you don't need a particular facility, communicate that to us. We'll go through our review process. If you do need a facility, communicate that back to us as well. So when it comes to Nordale, it's my understanding that the Board of Education can put a plan together that may consider mothballing a facility, but their sole purpose is to provide education. So they're not able to just sit on a facility indefinitely. They have to turn that back over to the Borough Assembly, where we would then determine what its future holds.
And then there's Joy School, which it looks like you're going to get the keys to. Does the borough at this point have any plans for Joy School?
So we're currently doing the analysis of both Joy and Anderson out at Eielson to determine if there's any bond payment money that was associated with those particular schools. I believe there is bond money that was associated with both of them. Are there any penalties, if you will, for those schools no longer being used as school facilities? And then what other contractual limitations do we have for those 2 sites? Eielson, Anderson is located on leased land at Eielson Air Force Base, and so we are looking at what those lease options provide. What are our obligations to turn that facility back over to the Air Force? So we're doing that analysis right now. For Joy, it's a little bit differently because it's our own facility. And as we do that work to better understand what limitations that we have for the bond component side, we'll certainly be entertaining options for sale or lease, or even demolition if that makes sense. But we're still in the process of doing that analysis. It's been communicated to us that the school district plans on giving us keys to those facilities sometime in October of this fiscal year, or of this current calendar year. So next fiscal year. And we did, I guess to add to that too, we did account for that in our budgets if we were to be maintaining those facilities, such as insurance, utilities, things like that. So they'll be fully covered once the keys get transferred over to us.
Do you have a need for space? Do you have a need for space for your operations?
We do have a need for space with borough operations. We've got some folks that are kind of out there throughout the borough. one of the particular needs that we have is with the new transit facility. It does not include the operations center for emergency operations or for our air quality division, which are currently housed at Pega Road. So as we look at that transition and moving our transit facilities to the new facility, my hope, the administration's hope, is that we can either have the same discussion with Pega Road that we are with Joy, where we look at, do we demo, do we lease, or do we sell the property? So we certainly do have, and there's current needs that we have within the facilities, where we've got folks that are in really tight quarters. We'll do that analysis with Joy, but it's an elementary school. My guess is that the cost to renovate it to make it useful for our uses are not really, don't really make sense. But we're doing that analysis now. Alex.
I understand the South Cushman shooting range is scheduled to be closed from like mid-May to mid-August this year. Can you tell us a little about that, why it's happening, what people can expect?
Yeah, the South Cushman shooting range was actually one of our first projects that was nominated under the Capital Improvement Program almost 3 years ago. It was one of our kind of big success stories early on. Because of that particular program, we were able to apply for Alaska Department of Fish and Game grant dollars, and we received over $1 million to go to that particular project, and we're going to construction this summer. It will be doing site improvements, safety improvements to the facility, including things like ADA access, a bathroom, as well as partitioning our shooting lanes so that we can have more safety between users when they're out on that particular site. It does mean that that facility is going to be closed for the upcoming summer. We have had folks that have been pretty concerned about that. That is a very highly used site and rec site here in the borough, so our goal is to get that turned over as quickly as possible, but we do need time to do those improvements. And I think the community will be very happy with those improvements when they see them being completed this fall. Do you have more follow-up?
Oh, it wasn't a follow-up, it was a question, if that's all right. The facilities maintenance technician position that's being removed from the budget proposal, is that a position that is currently filled, so it involved a layoff, or is that merely moving on a kind of last position?
It's a perm term, right? Yeah, so we had a couple of programs. I think this is the inventory or assessment. Yeah, it's our facility. It was a program we did to look at our different facilities, account for the maintenance components. So if you have a boiler, developing the program for, okay, how often do you service it? When should it be replaced? And that was a program-funded position.
Okay, so it wasn't meant to be permanent?
Correct.
It's sunsetting?
Yes. Yeah, perm term is permanent temporary, so it can be up to 2 years. It's a full benefited position, but at the end of that time period, it does lapse.
I have one last question. I saved the last because it's really not, I may have to follow up with staff later. It's just not something that's currently happening, but involving the new athletic facility. Once upon a time, when Angela Major was on the Borough Assembly, she was acting as liaison to the Fort Wainwright, other components of the military. There was this joint task force discussion about an athletic facility on military property that borough citizens could enjoy, and the borough invested in it. And I cannot remember the figure. 15 sticks in my head. It could be 150,000 or 1.5 million. So, like I said, I might have to follow up. But whatever happened to that and the borough's investment in that?
So I believe the borough appropriated $50,000 to that program. I actually believe that the Army declined that funding, and so the funding did lapse, go back to the General Treasury here at the Fairbanks North Star Borough. We did finish that partnership, that kind of planning charrette, if you will, with the Army. It did not result in a project, obviously, but we still do continue to have conversations about public-private partnerships, public partnerships with the Army, with any of our military partners on how we could potentially take advantage of joint use facilities. So we've recently had conversations with the Carlson Center to that tune. But at this time, it doesn't look like there's a path for at least a partnership of that size. And Fort Wainwright has actually been recipient of a number of funding streams for projects on the installation, so that the need kind of went away, if you will, for some of that partnership. But we're still very interested in it. If we have these facilities, whether it be on the installation or off the installation, we'd love to have an agreement, a partnership for community members to use. Either way. Okay. You guys had some doozies today, so I'm joking. Well, I guess just a final wrap up. You're all well aware we've got our website stood up with the budget page. We've got resources on there from prior years. We've updated our timelines, and we'll be putting this particular recording on there if you're listening after the session. We want to share that, and that's where our budget's going to be when it gets fully released to the public here in the upcoming days. So look forward to those discussions with the Assembly, and thanks for being here today.